The clinic was quiet that evening, the hum of medical equipment, the only sound breaking the silence. I had just finished locking up when I noticed the figure standing in the doorway. She wasn't human. That much was clear from the moment I laid eyes on her. Her skin shimmered under the fluorescent lights, shifting in color between deep violet and a pale blue that reminded me of the sky before dawn. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, strands too smooth and perfect to belong to any human woman. But it was her eyes that truly held me still, large, iridescent, swirling with emotion I couldn't quite name. She was beautiful in a way that felt almost unreal, and yet she looked afraid. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the clipboard I had been holding. It wasn't unusual for off-worlders to seek medical help from human clinics. Our advancements in certain fields had outpaced even the most developed alien civilizations. But something about the way she stood there, the way her hands trembled slightly against the doorway, told me this wasn't just any medical request. I took a careful step forward. "Are you lost?" Her gaze snapped up to meet mine. "You?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "You are a healer?" I nodded slowly, setting the clipboard down. "I'm a doctor, yes. If you need help, you've come to the right place." She hesitated only a moment longer before stepping inside. Her movements were deliberate, graceful in a way that made me think of water flowing over smooth stone. But there was tension in her shoulders, a stiffness in her spine that told me she wasn't entirely at ease. "I need assistance," she said finally, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. I gestured for her to sit, watching as she carefully lowered herself onto the examination table. I could tell she was struggling to maintain her composure. "Tell me what's wrong," I said, keeping my voice gentle. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, with a deep breath, she finally said, "I cannot breathe." I blinked. That was not what I had expected. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, and there was something raw in her expression, something that looked a lot like shame. "My people have tried everything," she continued. "Our healers, our scientists. They say my body rejects all attempts. They do not know why." She hesitated before adding, almost in a whisper, "And if I cannot be cured, I will be exiled." I frowned, absorbing her words. Izari exile was no small thing. I had read about their culture before, their strict traditions, their obsession with lineage and legacy. If she was cast out, she wouldn't just be losing her home. She would be losing everything. Your people. They don't. "Make exceptions?" I asked carefully. Her hands curled into fists in her lap. "No. To fail in this is to fail my entire bloodline." There was something so deeply unfair about it that I felt my jaw tighten. I took a slow breath. "And you came here because—" She met my gaze. "Because human medicine has solved many afflictions before. Perhaps it can solve mine." I leaned back slightly, considering this was complicated. Alien reproductive biology wasn't exactly my specialty, but I had worked with enough off-world patients to know that humans had a unique advantage when it came to adaptability. And something about the quiet desperation in her eyes made me want to try. I nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Relief flooded her expression so quickly, so completely, that for a moment she looked like an entirely different person. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know then just how much that decision would change. My life over the next few weeks, I threw myself into research. Vishari was patient with the endless tests, the scans, the long nights spent analyzing data. She was strong, never complaining, never showing frustration, even when the results were inconclusive, but I could see the weight of it on her shoulders. One night, after a particularly long day of testing, I found her sitting on the examination table, staring at the floor. I hesitated before stepping closer. "Vishari?" She didn't look up. "Do you think this will work?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not giving up." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "You're the first healer who has ever said that to me." That caught me off guard. I sat down beside her. "They just Gave up, she nodded. They saw me as a failure, a broken thing. They didn't say it out loud, but I could see it in their eyes. I clenched my jaw. Well, they're wrong. Her gaze flicked to mine. I held it, making sure she saw the certainty in my expression. You're not broken, Vishari, and I'm going to prove it. Something in her softened then, and for the first time since she had walked through my doors, she smiled. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. I had been analyzing her genetic markers when I noticed an anomaly, something that shouldn't have been there. A dormant receptor, inactive for reasons I couldn't yet explain. I ran simulations, I tested theories, and finally I found the hard answer. It wasn't that she couldn't reproduce, it was that her body had been rejecting the process because it had never been properly triggered. Her biology wasn't malfunctioning, it was waiting for something her own people had never been able to provide. When I told her, she stared at me, wide-eyed. You mean, there's a way? I nodded. There's a way. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the examination table. And you're sure? As sure as I can be, I said. But there's one thing. She tilted her head. What is it? I hesitated. The treatment should work, but to be certain, it would need to be tested. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, she spoke. Then, I want you to test it. I blinked. Wait. What? She took a slow breath, as if bracing herself. You are the one who healed me. You are the one who found the answer. In my culture, it is only right that the one who brings life should ensure its strength. I was suddenly very aware of the space between us. Vishari, I started. She stepped closer. I know your kind does not see things as we do, she said softly. But I have spent weeks with you. I have seen the way you care, the way you refuse to give up. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If I must share my future with someone, I would choose you. My breath caught in my throat. I had spent so much time thinking of her as my patient. But now, standing so close, her shimmering eyes searching mine for an answer, I realized something. She wasn't just my patient, she was something more. And the choice before me wasn't just about medicine anymore. It was about us. I took a step back, trying to process what she had just said. The air between us felt charged, a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Vishari, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. What you're asking, this isn't just a test. It's not just medicine. This is... I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. This is personal. She tilted her head slightly, her silver-white hair shifting like liquid metal. And do you not wish to be personal with me? Her voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the emotion in it. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I truly let myself see her, not as my patient, not as a case to solve, but as someone standing at the edge of something unknown, just as I was. She had come to me broken, desperate, and now she stood before me whole, not because of science alone, but because someone had believed in her, because I had believed in her. I swallowed hard. It's not that I don't want to, I admitted. It's that I need to be sure that you want this. Not because of duty, not because of tradition, but because you choose it. She took another step closer. What if I already have? The word sent a shiver down my spine. I had spent my life healing others, fixing what was broken, but this was something different. This was a choice that carried weight, that could change everything. Her gaze never wavered. I was never given a choice before, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. For all my life I have been told what I must do, who I must be. She reached out, hesitating for only a moment, before her fingers brushed against mine. But now I can choose, and I choose you. The moment stretched between us, heavy, with meaning. I could still walk away. I could still pretend this was just about medicine, about a clinical breakthrough, but I would be lying to myself. I wasn't just helping her anymore. I cared for her, and when she looked at me like that, like I was the answer to something she hadn't even known she was searching for, I knew there was no turning back. Slowly, I lifted my hand and covered hers. "Then, we do this together," I said. A breath of relief escaped her lips, and she closed her fingers around mine, as if she had been afraid I would pull away. I didn't. The night felt different after that. I wasn't sure what I had expected, awkwardness, hesitation, but instead there was a strange kind of ease between us, as if, now that the decision had been made, there was no longer a reason to hold back. We spent the evening in the lab, finalizing the treatment parameters, ensuring that the process would be safe. But the air between us was charged in a way it hadn't been before. Every glance, every brush of fingers, felt significant. I caught her watching me more than once, her swirling eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name, and each time I found myself holding my breath. It wasn't just attraction, it was trust. She trusted me, and that meant more than I could put into words. When the time came to administer the treatment, I followed every precaution. I monitored her vitals, tracked every shift in her body's response. The process was delicate, a careful balance of stimulating the dormant receptors without overwhelming. Her system, she remained still throughout, her faith in me absolute. And when it was done, she opened her eyes and reached for my hand without hesitation. I took it. "It worked?" she asked softly. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It worked?" Something flickered in her expression, something too deep, too raw to be spoken aloud, but she didn't need to say it. I already understood. Afterward, we sat together in the quiet of the clinic. She rested against my side, exhaustion tugging at her features, but there was a peace in her expression I had never seen before. "Do you regret it?" she asked after a long silence. I turned my head slightly, looking down at her. "Regret what?" "Choosing this, choosing me." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached out, gently brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "No," I said finally. "Not for a second." She exhaled softly, as if she had been holding on to something she was only now allowing herself to release. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about healing anymore. This was about us. And no matter what came next, I wasn't going to let her face it alone. The night air was still as we sat together in the dim glow of the clinic's examination room. Outside, the city hummed with distant life, hovercars drifting silently through the sky, neon signs flickering in and out of view, the gentle murmur of civilization never truly resting. But inside, it was just the two of us. Vashari leaned against me, her breath steady, her warmth a quiet presence beside me. She hadn't spoken for a while, and I didn't push her. She had been through so much, years of rejection, the weight of her people's expectations, the looming threat of exile. And now, after everything, she finally had hope. But hope was fragile. I could feel the unspoken tension in her body, the way she clutched my sleeve just a little too tightly, as if afraid that this moment, this chance, could still be taken from her. I turned slightly, letting my fingers brush over her hand. "You're thinking too much?" She huffed a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You don't know my mind, human." I smiled at that. "I don't have to. It's written, all over your face." She looked up at me then, her iridescent eyes searching mine, as if trying to figure out whether I was teasing or telling the truth. She must have found her answer because she sighed, shifting to sit up properly. Her fingers lingered against my arm before she pulled away, her expression growing serious. "What happens now?" she asked. The question hung between us, heavy and uncertain. I had expected this moment, had known it would come eventually. But now that it was here, I realized I didn't have a perfect answer. What did happen now? The treatment had worked. Biologically, she was no longer an outcast among her people. But the circumstances that had brought us to this moment weren't so easily erased. Would she leave? Return to her world with proof of her worth? Would she forget the time we had spent together, the way our lives had intertwined in ways I never could have predicted? The thought sent an unexpected pang through my chest. "I guess that depends on you," I said finally. She frowned slightly. On me? I nodded. This was never just about medicine, Vishari. It was about you, your choice, your future. I hesitated before adding, and where I fit into it. She held my gaze for a long time, and then, slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against mine before closing around them with quiet certainty. I do not wish to leave, she said softly. Not yet. Relief flooded through me in a way I hadn't expected. I squeezed her hand gently. Then stay. Her lips parted slightly as if she hadn't considered how simple the answer could be. But it was simple. She wasn't just a patient. Anymore. She wasn't just a stranger who had come seeking help. She was Vishari, and I wasn't ready to let her go. Days passed, and her strength returned in ways I hadn't even realized she had been missing. She smiled more often now, real smiles, ones that reached her eyes. She moved with more confidence, no longer burdened by the weight of uncertainty, and the clinic no longer felt like just my space. She lingered there, watching me work, asking questions about human medicine, with genuine curiosity. I taught her what I could, and in return, she told me about her world, her people, the traditions she had once believed in, the expectations she had once been forced to follow. But more than anything, we just existed together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. One evening, as I was finishing up paperwork, she sat across from me, absent-mindedly toying with a medical instrument she clearly didn't understand. Human science is strange, she mused. I raised an eyebrow. Strange how? She tilted her head. It is so adaptable, fluid. It does not simply accept limitations, it looks for ways to break them. I chuckled. That's kind of how humans work too. She smiled. At that, yes, I am beginning to see that. Her gaze softened as she set the instrument down, watching me in a way that made my heart beat just a little faster. You are unlike any healer I have ever met, she said. I shrugged. Maybe you just haven't met the right ones. No, she said firmly. It is not just that. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of my desk. You did not see me as a failure, she continued, even when my own people did, even when I believed I was. She exhaled slowly, her voice quieter now. Do you know what that means to someone like me? I swallowed hard. Vishari, I have spent my life being told what I must be, she murmured, what I must do, and yet with you, I am simply myself. The words sent a rush of warmth through me, unexpected and overwhelming. I hadn't realized until that moment just how much I needed to hear them, how much I needed her. She reached for my hand then, fingers warm against my skin. I am no longer afraid, she said softly, not of my future, not of my choice. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she leaned in and pressed her lips to mine. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, a quiet question rather than a demand. I answered by deepening it, my hands finding their way to her waist, pulling her closer. She melted against me, and for that moment there was no clinic, no past, no looming uncertainty about what came next. There was only us, and for the first time in both our lives, that was enough. As the days passed, it became clear that Vishari had no intention of leaving. She became a part of my world in ways I hadn't expected, helping in the clinic, learning about human medicine, integrating into a life she had never known she could have. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized that I didn't just want her in my life. I needed her. One night, as we sat on the rooftop of the clinic, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she spoke softly. I was prepared to spend my life alone, she admitted. I turned to her. Why? She exhaled. Because I was told I was wrong for so long. Because I believed it. I reached for her hand. You're not wrong, Vishari. You never were. She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. And for a long moment she said nothing. Then, finally, she whispered, Neither were you. The words hit deeper than I expected, because the truth was, I had spent my own life feeling like I wasn't enough. like no matter how many people I healed, how much I gave, something inside me was still missing, but with her, that feeling was gone. I squeezed her hand. "So what now?" she smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Now, we build something new." And as I held her close, watching the stars flicker in the night sky, I knew one thing for certain. I had cured her once, but in the end, she had healed me too. The days passed like the turning pages of an unwritten story, each moment between us adding another layer to something deeper than I had ever imagined. Vishari had not only become a part of my world, she had become my world. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered between us. She hadn't spoken much about the future, not about her people, not about the consequences of staying here on Earth. We had built something beautiful, but was it enough? Was I enough? I found myself watching her more closely, searching for signs of hesitation in her gaze, in the way she moved through the clinic, in the way she held my hand when she thought I wasn't paying attention, but Vishari wasn't. Someone who wavered, she was fierce in her decisions, bold in her choices, and she had chosen me. At least, that was what I kept telling myself, until the night she disappeared. I came home late, exhausted from a long shift at the clinic, expecting to find her waiting for me the way she always did. But the apartment was silent, cold. The scent of her still lingered in the air, but she was gone. Panic gripped me instantly. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone taken her? Had she been forced to return to her people? Had she left by choice? I searched everywhere. Her clothes were still here, her belongings untouched. The only thing missing was her. And then I saw it. A small device lay on the table, blinking faintly. A communication beacon, unlike anything human-made. I picked it up with trembling hands, pressing the activation panel. Her voice filled the room, soft but steady. "Joren." I had to go. I sank into the nearest chair, my heart pounding. "I wanted to tell you, but I knew you would try to stop me. Damn right I would have. I never belonged to my people the way they wanted me to," she continued. "But I cannot ignore what they will do if they find me here. I am an outcast, a failure in their eyes. But now, with your treatment, I am also proof." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Her body had changed because of my work. She was no longer what they deemed broken, and that made her dangerous. A living challenge to everything they believed. "If I stay," she whispered, "they will come, and they will not stop at just taking me." I closed my eyes, gripping the device so tightly, my knuckles turned white. "Joren, Her voice broke for the first time, a hesitation. A crack in the mask she always wore. I wanted to stay. The message ended, and I was left sitting in silence. My mind reeling, my chest aching in a way I had never felt before. She was gone, and she had done it to protect me. But she had underestimated one thing. I wasn't the kind of man who let go that easily. For weeks, I searched. I contacted people I shouldn't have, pulled in favors that would take me years to repay. I dove into databases, tracked unauthorized landings, decrypted signals from unknown origins, and then, finally, I found her. A distant outpost on the edge of known space. A place where exiles gathered, where those rejected by their own species sought refuge. I stole a ship the next day. The station was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and burnt circuitry, the kind of place where nobody asked questions, where names meant little and loyalty was rarer than clean oxygen. I moved through the crowds, scanning every face, searching for the one that mattered, and then I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the main hall speaking with someone, a tall, armored figure with the sharp features of a soldier. She was wearing a cloak, her hood drawn up, but I would recognize that stance anywhere. Vishari. I pushed forward, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd, ignoring the way the air seemed to thicken with every step I took, and then, as if sensing me, she turned, our eyes met. For a moment the world around us faded, then she whispered something to the soldier and took a slow step toward me. "Joren." I didn't let her speak. I closed the distance between us in a heartbeat, pulling her into my arms. She gasped, stiffening for just a second before melting into me, her fingers gripping the fabric of my jacket as if afraid I would disappear. "I found you," I murmured against her hair. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. I pulled back just enough to look at her. "And you shouldn't have left." Her expression twisted, pain flickering across her face. "I did it to keep you safe. I don't care." Her eyes widened. "I don't care what happens," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't care what they do, what they think. I don't care about any of it, if it means being without you." Her lips parted slightly, as if trying to find the words. I didn't let her. I kissed her. It wasn't soft or hesitant like the first time. It was desperate, raw, the kind of kiss that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much time spent apart. And she kissed me back just as fiercely. When we finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine, her breath warm against my skin. "They'll come for me," she whispered. "Then we run," I said. "Together." She let out a shaky breath. "You would give up everything? For you?" I held her gaze. In a heartbeat. Silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at her lips. Then, "Let's go." We didn't stop running. Through back-alley planets, across uncharted territories, through the cracks of a universe that didn't care about people like us. We became ghosts in the galaxy, whispers on the wind, but we were together, and, in the end, that was all that mattered, because I had healed her once, and now she was the one who had saved me.